So hello, good morning everyone. Good evening or good afternoon, whatever time you're watching this. So I hope you have already submitted your first lesson of Module 1 because for today we are going to move on to Lesson 2, the cost concepts and classifications. And as always, please comment your name and section for your attendance for this lesson. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify different types of costs. You should be able to explain why costs should be accounted. And last, you will be able to compute for the different types of cost. So what is cost? It refers to the monetary measure of the amount of resources given up or used for some specified purpose. So it is the value the goods or services expended to obtain current or future events. So in simpler terms, this is the term na ginagamit natin that measure the monetary amount ng mga resources na ating binili or ginamit or even give up. So that is the cost. So costs can be classified into different categories or for different purposes. So costs may be categorized according to their function. So first, according to function. So we have what we call manufacturing and the non-manufacturing costs. So we classify costs according to function. First, we have manufacturing costs. So these costs are incurred in the factory to convert raw materials into finished goods. It includes costs of raw materials used, the direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. So manufacturing costs represent all of the costs associated with producing or manufacturing a physical product. Then what we have also the non-manufacturing costs. So those costs not incurred in transforming materials to finished goods. So example, the selling expenses, the delivery expense, advertising, and administrative expense. So to further explain manufacturing costs, ito siya. Ito siya. The manufacturing costs are generally classified into three categories. We have the direct materials, the direct labor, and the factory overhead. So direct materials, these include the major material inputs that can be directly and conveniently traced to each unit of product. So tinatawag natin siya the cost object. So for example, for a frozen pizza manufacturer, so natin pizza manufacturer, ang direct material ana is yung mga major ingredients, the dough, the sauce, cheese, tapos, di ba, sa mga pizza meron ding mga meat, so, as well as the packaging material. So kung frozen pizza siya, of course, apil tong packaging material niya as a direct material. So di ba pag-usahin na po yung mga miscellaneous na mga ingredients, mga seasoning, tapos dili na to siya ma-trace sa individual products. So kato siya ginatawag to siya indirect materials. So next, we have direct labor. Direct labor naman, it refers to the hands-on labor that can be directly and conveniently traced to the product. So examples, wages of employees sa katong pizza production kuan, di ba? Continuous example, ang direct labor ato is itong labor sa mga employees sa production sa Pizza Hut atong naga-produce katong sweldo sa mga nadyo sa production, direct labor na siya. Hindi yun, it does not include the employee who rarely touch the product as at is being produced such as kanang mga kuan, mga security guard or mga nala sa office, wala na siya. The costs associated with those employees are considered as indirect labor. So when we have direct labor, meron tayong indirect labor. If you have direct materials, we have also indirect materials. Pero kato siya, the indirect materials and the indirect labor are part of what we call as the manufacturing overhead, or the third classification, the factory overhead. So it includes all manufacturing costs other than direct materials and direct labor incurred to produce a physical product. So let's say datong again itong mga cost na dili na to siya matrace sa isa ka product jud. Let's say the indirect materials, the indirect labor, kung rent sa factory, let's say kung si pizza factory nag-rent lang siya ng kanyang facility, so that is also factory overhead. Mga yung utilities, manufacturing overhead din siya. It does not include sa manufacturing overhead, wala na siya ilabot tong mga sa marketing ng mga cost because dili na siya appeal sa manufacturing costs. And let's expound the non-manufacturing. So again ha, as to function, makategorize na to siya to manufacturing and non-manufacturing. So sa non-manufacturing naman, we have two classifications: the marketing or selling expenses and the general and administrative expenses. So sa marketing, from the word marketing, these are expenses incurred to get the final product to the customer. So lahat ng mga expenses na atong ma-incur or magasto para ipagawas na ang product sa customer, gina-market ato, gina-advertise, those are non-manufacturing costs. So wala man siya i-appeal sa pag-manufacture, di ba, na expenses. So non-manufacturing siya. Next, we have the general and administrative expenses. So ang general expenses are those associated with running the overall business. So include appeal ito ang kanang general management, ang sweldo sa management, yung kanang ang mga rent sa katong mga office mo na siya mga non-manufacturing costs. Next, we also classify or categorize our costs according to ease of traceability. So we have what we call the direct and indirect costs. So direct costs, those that can be traced directly to a particular object, such as a particular product, department, or branch. For example, the direct materials, and the direct labor. So some operating expenses can also be classified as direct costs, such as advertising cost for a particular product. So pag ma-identify nato siya directly into a product, what we call that a direct costs. Indirect costs naman are those that cannot be traced to a particular object of costing. So ang tawag sa ana sila is common cost or joint cost. So include ng factory overhead, operating costs, a bit more than one product or department or branches. So, ang direct cost, kung direct labor, direct materials na kaya na to matrace dayon sa product. Ang indirect cost includes ng mga indirect labor, direct materials, dili kaya na to siya matrace dayon diretso sa isa ka product or the manufacturing overhead. Next, you also categorize costs according to the timing of charge against revenue. So we have what we call the product costs and the period costs. So sa product costs, um, they form part of the inventory and are charged against the revenue right away if they are sold. So these are also called inventoriable costs because it is a cost. It is the cost of the product or ang cost sa paghimo sa product. So all manufacturing costs daw, the direct materials, the direct labor, the factory overhead are all product costs. And period costs naman on the other hand are not inventoriable and are charged against revenue immediately. So period costs include the manufacturing costs such as selling expenses and administrative expenses. So kana siya ng mga expenses is dili siya pwede nimo inventory because expense na siya immediately pag nagasto na siya diretso. We also categorize the cost according to behavior in accordance with activity. So we have what we call the variable costs and the fixed cost. Si variable cost, from the word variable, naga-vary siya in total in production. So naga-change siya in variable to the total productions. Example, in the direct materials, direct labor, sales commission based on sales. So, naga-change siya ba? Let's say, ang direct materials, kung dako ang production, daghanan po ng direct materials. So, variable siya, naga-change siya. While fixed cost naman, these are the costs that remain constant. So, from the word fixed, wala siya naga-change. Example, rent sa building. Biskan pag unsa ka daghan inyong production, di ba? Di man siya naga-change. Fixed yun na siya na cost. So, that is a fixed cost. So, we also have the mixed cost. So this is a combination of the variable and the fixed cost. So costs that vary in total but not in proportion to changes in activity. It basically includes a fixed cost portion plus napoy variable cost. So example, it would be kanang electricity expense, di ba? Kanang nanan siya ang electricity expense, kung makita nimo nanan siya kanang fixed amount na siya fixed cost nga muna yung mabayaran. Pero na po na siya variable charges based on usage. Pag makita ninyo yung resibo pohon, na siya fixed cost, na siya variable. Ang tawag ato na cost is mixed cost. We also categorize costs according to relevance to the decision making. So we have the relevant cost and the standard cost. Relevant cost is the costs that will differ under alternative courses of action. So in other words, these costs refers to those that will affect a decision. So ang relevant costing or relevant cost, let's say, um, make or buy decision. Kanang make or buy decision, apil na siya sa relevant costing. Kung ikaw as a businessman, himuon ba nimo ni na product or palito na lang nimo ang product asa mas maka-save or mas maka-income. Kanang ina na cost, ang tawag doon is relevant cost or relevant costing. Standard cost naman, these are predetermined costs based on some reasonable basis such as past experiences or pre-budgeted na siya. The actual costs incurred are compared to standard cost. So, ang standard cost, pre-budgeted na good kayo. Nagihan naman nila dati. So, muna na siya ang standard based on the past experiences. We also categorize cost according to relevance to the decision making. So, same lagi po na continuous pa na siya. Sa relevant o standard, we have opportunity costs and the sunk costs. So, opportunity costs is the benefit forgone or given up when an alternative is chosen over the other. So, example, opportunity cost. If a business chooses to use its building for production rather than rent it out to tenants, so the opportunity cost would be the rent income that would be earned kung ang business nag-rent out, 'di ba? So, again, kung gigamit niya ang building for production that rather than i-rent it out to tenants, so ang opportunity cost there or ang benefit na nawala is the rent income na iyang tang madawat kung iyatang giparentahan. The sunk cost naman are historical costs that will not make any difference in making a decision. So unlike relevant costs, they do not have an impact on the matter at hand because sunk costs are costs na nahitabo na. So, wala siya difference sa imong decision making. So, from the word historical costs. Next, the last is the controllable costs. So, these refer to costs that can be influenced or controlled by the manager. So, example of controllable costs are advertising bonuses, direct materials, control man nimo, donations, subscription, employee compensation, mga office supplies and training. So, kato siya, mga makontrol na to na siya ng mga costs. So, let's practice. So, sample problem. We have, ambot lang if makita ba ninyo. So, we have question 1, question 2, question 3. We identify what kind of cost siya. So, for example, first problem, example na siya, alloy tubing used to make the bicycle frame. So, is it a direct cost or indirect cost? Of course, ang alloy ginagamit sa bicycle frames, that is a direct cost. It is a direct cost because ma-identify nato siya directly to the product, right? So sa question 2, is it a product cost or a period cost? So, of course, alloy, it is a product cost. That is a direct material. Hindi na siya labor, hindi na siya manufacturing overhead, hindi po na siya monthly expenses. So sa question 3, is the alloy variable or fixed? Of course, since it is a direct material, it is variable. Nag-change na siya. Nag-vary na siya um, based on the production. Next, number 2. Second item. Yung hourly wages paid to employees who cut and weld the alloy tubing. So, ano ba yan? Is it a direct cost or indirect cost? Of course, that is a direct cost. Sa question 2, is it direct material, direct labor, or is it a manufacturing overhead? Of course, it is a direct labor. Labor na siya kay sweldo mo na siya sa mga tao na nag-cut sa alloy daw. Next, ang cost behavior niya variable ba or fixed? Of course, it is variable because direct labor is variable. Factory rent. Okay, factory rent. Ano ba na siya? Direct or indirect? So, factory rent is? Of course, factory rent is indirect cost. Indirect siya because dili man nato siya ma-identify sa product ang factory rent. Tapos, it is not a material, it is not a labor, it is a manufacturing overhead. So, since it is a manufacturing overhead, it is a fixed cost. Next, we have, that is so on and so forth na lang. So, actually, there is answer key na here. Ito yung answer key niya. So, if you can screenshot na lang for you to practice. Next, let's solve na for the, let's solve for costing. So, for example, Garcia Company reported the following costs. We have the factory rent, direct labor, indirect materials, sales commissions, factory manager salary, advertising. The question now is A, how much is the total manufacturing costs of Garcia? And B, how much is Garcia Company's manufacturing overhead? So let's solve for problem A. How much is the total manufacturing of cost of Garcia? So manufacturing costs, you already know that these are the direct materials, direct labor, and the manufacturing overhead or the factory overhead. So those are given. Factory rent, is it direct labor materials or factory overhead? Of course, it is a factory overhead. Direct labor, of course, included na siya sa manufacturing. Indirect materials, of course, included. Direct materials, of course, included. Sales commission. Bakit wala labot ang sales commission? Because sales commission is not a manufacturing cost. It is non-manufacturing cost. Wala siya labot sa pag-manufacture sa product. Next, factory manager salary. It is a factory overhead. It is an indirect cost. Next, advertising. Of course, wala siya labot because wala man na siya appeal sa pag-produce or sa pag-manufacture sa product. So, we have the total manufacturing costs of $21,500. Next, letter B. How much is the manufacturing or factory overhead? Again, you have to remember that the factory overhead or the manufacturing overhead are that those costs that cannot be traceable directly to the product. So we have the indirect labors, indirect materials, and the factory overhead. So sa given, ito lang yung indirect material and the factory overhead, the rent and the manager salary. So the answer should be 10,000. So for your module requirements, you have to wait for further instruction because the module that was made, I didn't really make, the module that was made was incomplete. So I have to make my own problem. So wait lang kayo sa further instruction. So that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Pero wag lang 9 p.m. onwards. Thank you.